Hello, and welcome to Two Broad and Two Deep, the Doctor Who podcast where we talk about the Virgin new adventures starting from Time Worm Genesis all the way through to the dying days. I'm your host Anthony, and I'm always joined by Alasdair.
Hello.
And we have, returning to the podcast, Jim Trenowden.
Hello, thanks for having me back on for this brilliant book.
That was the apprehension in saying those words were it was very much felt there. So if you may not have noticed from that big pause, we are covering Transit, the 10th book in the Doctor Who Virgin New Adventures, first by Ben Aaronovitch within the series. And yes, it's one that's quite noteworthy within the series, I think, for fans. We're at a stage where we've got a new companion now officially on board. We've got a writer returning from the old series. We've got, quite a striking cover as well. So, what's not to love when you go into this? Well, at the time, let's find out what people said back then. Because in Doctor Who magazine, I want to believe it was issue 195 was when this was first reviewed by Gary Russell, who was editor at the time. Essentially, he does not feel this is a Doctor Who story. There's a lot that we'll go into about why that might be the case, but a lot of the readership did also agree. I'm looking at some of the notes from Doctor Who fans who wrote in with a record amount of letters, because it was like a page and a half of letters from fans on it. We had people saying things like thinking about Peter Darvill-Ivan's position as editor and whether he should be continuing as editor and bringing new blood 10 books in. There's folk who believe that this has dirtied the name of Doctor Who. That's to quote someone. Wow. There's folk who think there's too much new age philosophies being thrown in. And a 12-year-old from Plymouth who said, "Why are they all swearing all the time?" So there was quite a lot of interest in how this book went on a different direction.
Very puritanical in Plymouth.
Yeah, very big Puritans over there. But there was one standout one, and I'll maybe leave that letter to later when I give my sort of feelings. But yeah, for yourselves, Jim, Alasdair, did you read this book at the time? And if so, what were your thoughts on it? I'll go to Alasdair first.
So you cut out slightly, or did you say me?
Oh, yes, sorry, yes.
Yep, sorry, that was technology. Apologies again. No, I missed this at the time. I heeded the warnings from my fellow fans going, do not touch this book. And I stayed well away from it. And not read it until now, and it was quite the experience. It was... yeah, quite the experience. Let's just leave it there for just now. It was...
Yeah. Jim, did you read it at the time?
Not quite at the time, no. This isn't my first rodeo with this book, though. I think I mentioned last time that I was on. I did a read-through, or attempted to read through of the New Adventures when I was a teenager, so a couple of decades ago now. And yeah, this was the book that killed the read-through. I didn't want to skip it. I was aware that this had some importance to introduce characters and sort of world building that would be important later on, return later on in the series. So skipping it didn't feel like the right thing to do. Reading it didn't feel like the right thing to do. So I stopped. But actually, after the last time I came on here, I quite enjoyed getting back into the New Adventures. I carried on reading through, and I think I messaged you last year sometime. I actually did get to Transit, and I finished it and was able to carry on past it. And I have to say, I definitely have a less awful opinion of it this time around. I'm not going to, sort of see its praise per se. When you know what you're going in for, it's easier, I'll say.
Yeah. Like, for myself, this is the first time I have read it. It has been bandied around quite a lot on the internet whenever New Adventures are brought up in a lot of ways, as there's a lot of the worst excesses of that era within this. But to be honest, it's something that, for me, I actually felt not as bad reading this time. I don't know if it's been those years of people saying, "Oh, transit," that has made me think, okay, like coming out of it, that I wasn't as mentally scarred as I thought I was going to be from all of the trashing of Doctor Who as a concept, that at least from those letters at the time in Doctor Who magazine, a lot of fans felt. The one letter that stood out for me was one from a fan kind of semi-defending almost the concept of the New Adventures because of the kind of backlash to stuff like this. And they said they have dared to depict sexuality not as a giggly playground hanky-panky, but as an important part of characters' lives. The writers of the Virgin New Adventures shouldn't have their creativity squeezed by the constraints of perceived good taste. And that was also by someone from Plymouth. So it seems they're not all prudes in Plymouth. But
it's all going Plymouth.
I thought that was a... yeah. They have quite discursive discussions, I'm sure, around Plymouth. But yeah, to me that kind of helped clarify not the issues that I had with this book, but understanding this book a bit more and what it was maybe trying to do. So overall, I didn't quite feel the hate as much as people might have. The Doctor and Benny arrive in a concrete artery that keeps the 22nd century's lifeblood flowing, the Sol Transit System. It's a public transport system connecting planets within the solar system with near-instant transit, but it now is venturing into interstellar connections with a new line opening between the solar system and Arcturus. The only issue is that the connection gets rather derailed when an entity from another dimension rips into the tunnels and vaporises everyone at the grand opening. With Benny flung to another station possessed by this unknown entity, the Doctor buddies up with Cadiatu Lethbridge Stewart, a university student with more than just a name to her backstory, in finding her and stop the sentient virus from spreading across the transport network. After he gets rat-faced, visits some sex clubs and makes some dinner in the old gaff in Kent, that is. Yeah, I don't know if this time round, Jim, you said you've read it before, you couldn't get through it. This time you did. What made you feel that you could get through it this time round? Was it just you knew what you were expecting, or...?
Yeah, I definitely felt like I was pre-warned this time around in a way that I perhaps wasn't 20-something years ago. I didn't have the best time of it this time, I'm not going to lie. I wasn't suddenly in love with this book, but there's some interesting concepts here. There's a sense of scale that you just wouldn't have been able to do on the TV series, which is quite interesting when you consider that this was apparently submitted for season 25 originally. Can you imagine something like this with the budget of the Happiness Patrol, for example? But no, I mean, the grimness doesn't bother me, I have to say. The unlikable worlds, unlikable characters, I do think they're unlikable for what it's worth. But I'm a fan of Saywood, who, for example, the Kate Androzani is up there, and there's not a single likable character in that, really. So that didn't really bother me. It's getting too far ahead of the conversation. It's the writing style that I find quite tricky, perhaps. The denseness of the world building that feels like you need a glossary to hand the entire time.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I don't think I've encountered some. I don't know if there's any other Doctor Who book that has a glossary at the back, and not even a comprehensive one, because there were some words that I was still not sure of, and phrases that were said, particularly in the second half, where there's things like cake monsters, and I was just thinking about this is the 90s. There was that episode of like the Day to Day about cake being the fake drug. And I was like, are they on the imaginary drug from the day-to-day or something? And it's meant to be something like that, but it was hard to follow certain phrases, and I don't know if it warrants needing to have a whole glossary for it, for world building purposes.
I feel it's quite telling that they felt they needed to include that. But even the names, the character names, I feel are quite difficult. Credit card, Dogface, Ming the Merciless, Lambarda. It can be quite tricky to sort of keep tabs of who's who. I think maybe that's just me. Perhaps I don't know, challenged reading this. I don't know.
I really kind of enjoyed it, but it took a long time to work out what the hell was going on at any given point, and even just the way the scenes kept switching around. Right, we're here now. Now we're here, and I was coming away going, I'm not even sure where here is. After a while I decided that was quite a deliberate choice, just to kind of keep us disorientated and keep us going back and forward and not letting us get steady with things. And I'm going to be controversial, I quite enjoyed that style once I got used to it, but it took me a good quarter to a third to get used to the back and forward. Yeah, I know. It surprised me as well, because I came into this book ready to hate it. I was really, really ready to go, this is awful. I get what everyone was talking about, but it was like, actually, this isn't. Narratively speaking, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the scene settings. I enjoyed the way they changed back and forward. It was quite inventive. I wouldn't go as far as to say I loved everything about it. There was definite things that were jarring. And you're saying that people were calling for Darvel Evange's head as an editor. Given that he blatantly didn't read this book, I think that's reasonable, because there's no way he'd have let this go out had he read it.
Well, he did say he did read it, just not necessarily in the right order. He was sent chapters at any given point. He wrote a big editorial into Doctor Who magazine to try and defend its honour after this ungodly backlash, and he talks about how in the letter, that Aaronovitch was sending in chapters here and there, and so he was reading the chapters. So he was able to see what was being produced, but just not as a whole linear book.
Which is quite keeping with the style, really.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. They worked quite well with the style, but surely he must have spotted like this gratuitous swearing and fairly graphic sexual references. I mean, we've had previous books where we had Ace running away from her room because she was hearing thump a spring, a thump a spring, a thump a spring, and that was quite jarring. But they left nothing to the imagination in this one.
Yeah.
I read part of it out to my wife earlier on, and she's still not speaking to me. She's convinced I was reading porn.
I did the same. I was reading one of the sex scenes out to my flatmate to try and see, does this sound like a form of text that someone would use? And there was a sentence within it, but essentially it was talking about, I can't find it now, but essentially it said how the sun was shining through the window, and was it kind of like a texture wrap of colour onto like Kadiatu's body. And my flatmate, who is like a computer programmer, was just like, that's the most nerdiest virgin thing to say, is to somehow use, texture wrapping in a sexual context. Which, I do not disagree with. It's maybe not exactly something you'd find in a Catherine Steele novel.
And I'm still struggling to work out what it actually brought to proceedings. It didn't add anything to it other than to say, this is how adult are we? This is very adult. Look at how adult we have. Look at all the adult sex we're having. It's like,
yeah. I mean, to be fair, I mean, like the sex scenes and the swearing and the stuff was okay for me in terms of, it being part of this world, being a cynical grimier world and all of this stuff happening within it. It was more so the structure of the book and the style of how some of it was written. Not necessarily, to be honest, like apart from that texture wrapping comment. The sex scenes itself, at least, thankfully, weren't as graphic. It wasn't going into a big amount of detail for them. It was more so, the jumping about from each location to location to try and kind of literally speed run like world development by saying, oh look, we've got a train station here, we've got another interstellar station here, we've got this whole network line, and here's the technicalities of how like interstellar public transport works and all of this. And I was just like, it was way too much for me to kind of comprehend to read. And by the halfway point, when it was slowing down a bit and they were spending a bit more time on a location, and then you would see someone else in another location, and you can see it try to form together to meet somewhere, I was feeling it a bit more. But the sheer amount of like zipping and zapping across so many different stations in this kind of public interstellar transport system was, it was quite disorientating for me.
Yeah, and I think similarly, I think it might have been you, Alasdair, that said on the WhatsApp group we had for this that there's not very much in the way of introductions to anything. You join everything in the middle of a scene or in the middle of a sequence of events, which, again, I guess you could argue it makes the world feel quite alive and that you're just dipping into it. But in terms of actually following the plot and following the characters, it isn't too conducive to be able to follow the plot very well.
It felt like a season 3 type episode or something. It's like, I presumed you'd been there for the first 2 seasons and following it and working things out, and then you just presumed you were along for the ride, and we weren't.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really much plot in the way of what is happening in the book, because the essential plot is, they are connecting to another system, and by doing so, I want to say they're using transmat of some form to have like the interstellar connections. They accidentally make a wormhole to another dimension, and some ungodly beast from another dimension is ripping through the transit system, and that's essentially it, is to try and contain that. That plot in itself is quite, it's not a massive amount of the story really. It's quite easily solved. It's quite, when they go to it, it's not as much of the drama and the tension throughout this. It's everything else about the world that you jump into it at random points. I mean, I had to go back a few pages after certain points to try and figure out that for example, in this story, which is I say is Benny's first story as a companion, where I was like, when did Benny get possessed? And later on, with I was going to say the Scooby Gang. I might as well call them that. The Cyber Scooby Gang of the the folk who are maintaining the systems. Like, they're suddenly in the midst of driving like a different line of maintenance work, and it's like, Kadiatu is someone else suddenly after like doing a massive drug deal plot, and it's like what who, when did that happen? It's too busy explaining how the technicalities of interstellar public transport works to remind us, and here's what is happening on the interstellar public transport system of characters doing a thing, and it doesn't follow that stuff, which is frustrating.
And that was, just when you're saying that reminds me of something that really, really bugged me. A huge part of how they start Kadiatu's story off is she needs money, she's desperate for money, she can barely survive, and about halfway through she forgets about the money pen, she forgets about all the money she's owed, and then it turns out she's on the verge of discovering time travel. She couldn't afford a soft drink at the start of this, but she can do a time travel project. What the...
Yeah, I Cadiati's a funny one. This was one of the elements that I was aware of as a teenager. A character that would continue on in the series, and I'm not sure I get the appeal. I'm not sure why anyone would care about her at this point. Maybe this is me being cynical. I don't know, but it feels like a checklist of quirks designed to tell us that this character is important and that we should care about them. It's a genetically engineered soldier who's the descendant of one of the Doctor's best friends who stumbles upon time travel and has visions of ancient Gallifrey. And it's like just a collection of quirks, aren't you?
Also, with the exception of the visions of Gallifrey, that is incredibly close to River Song's story.
Yes.
That does feel like it could have been a pull there.
I mean, everyone keeps talking about how it was Benny was the inspiration for River Song, but after reading this book, it's like, I think it might have been Cadiatu. It's...
Well, yeah, maybe the only VNA book Moffat did read was just Transit, and just kind of merged the two thoughts of those companions together to make the one.
Well, and it's really funny you say that, because I'd also made a note about later on in the book, the Doctor considers whether he's too well known and deletes records of himself, which feels, well, it's something that Moffat revisited, right? So perhaps this is the only new adventures that you read.
Well, he might not have been the only showrunner to have read this book as well, because since we're just on showrunners nicking stuff somehow from Transit, near the end of the book, one of the Doctor's ploys to kind of control the big entity in the transport system is to channel all of the Artron energy within the TARDIS into himself. And I'm like, all right, so Sylvester McCoy can survive that, but Eccleston can't. Like at the end of the parting of the ways.
So what you're saying is this is the most influential new adventure series.
This is every single time a new showrunner comes, they are handled a copy of Transit, and they say pick something new out of it.
This is how to do things.
And the TARDIS is influenced as well, because you have it ramming full speed into a wall and being embedded, which is pretty much how Russell T Davies's second run has been treating the TARDIS. It keeps landing full speed into walls.
And you've got the TARDIS being possessed, I guess, in this run, haven't you? So, wow. So, we have Transit to thank for the entirety of the modern series.
I was trying to think of anything that Chibnall could find influence within this. Maybe it's the lack of characterization with the Cyber Scooby Gang or something. That'd be consistent with him having too many characters and not knowing what to do with them.
Well, I mean, you could argue in that sense, having too many characters not knowing what to do with them. As you said, this is Bernice's first trip with a Doctor.
Yes.
And
yes.
Where is she? Well, immediately she gets separated from the Doctor and taken over, and we get false versions of her. The character basically isn't present in this book.
Yeah.
And that's such a weird idea to me. Like, I appreciate, the classic series wasn't great for companion first goes at trying time travelling or whatever. But looking at it with that modern lens, thinking about things like the end of the world, for example, characters' kind of first trips in the TARDIS feel quite important. And when we've got the kind of luxury of breathing space that New Adventures have, you would think that they'd capitalise on that. And yet, immediately, Denise just doesn't exist, basically.
And even then, the job of rescuing her and retrieving her, and the Doctor realised, no, that's not my Benny. That's about 5 books from now. That would have worked a few books in. Not on the first adventure when she's been in the TARDIS for all of half an hour, if that. It's too much to say he knows her that well. The whole point of it was he didn't know her that well, and that's...
Yeah, it really kind of like breaks what we were hoping to have as in terms of their relation, because you can't forge further in their relationship given that she is literally possessed by, the tunnel demon, or whatever it is. Like, she doesn't get to be able to be her own character throughout the whole thing, and the only time she is her own character is near the end to have a kind of reflective thought about how the Doctor treats companions in general, and she feels like she's a pet to the Doctor because she starts like barking out the blue, And you think, well, is she still possessed or not by this point? By just starting to do that.
Weirdly, this whole idea would have worked better if it was still Ace as the companion.
Do you know what? It could well have been that, because this could be the fourth version of how to try and get rid of Ace, or third version actually, from Nightshade to Love and War to this, to find a way to get rid of her.
I Love and War for Benny and Transit for Cadiatu, they both feel like companion auditions. Like we're testing the water to see what people think, and it feels as if they went, "Oh, we want Benny, so maybe just don't have her Cadiatu by the end of the end of the book." Didn't work for me, that part.
No, and it's bizarre when you think, with the benefit of hindsight, how important and how loved Benny becomes. You don't get any sense of that from the first two books. You know, by the end, if you're just reading it in order, by the end of Transit, you have no idea why anyone liked this character.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's actually, it feels like sort of like we've talked about how, John Peel writes the Seventh Doctor in spite of having to write for the Seventh Doctor. So there's a lot of like, you can feel the contempt about writing for it. I don't see it's a contemptuous take for Benny and Cadiatu, but it feels like Ben Aaronovitch is kind of trying to tell people that you're regretting not going for Cadiatu near the end, because there's a part near the end where the Doctor does offer her to come in the TARDIS, and she's like, "Well, I'll find another way," and he says, "Oh, you'll regret it," and the way that like I say with Benny, should be like a pet. It feels like that's not what she was like. Literally last book they were wanting she was going to be an equal, and the fact she's now thinking of herself as a submissive, like inferior person to her, it's like she's not going to cave in that quickly.
It's funny you say about that I'll make my own way scene with Cadiatu at the end. This kind of like getting all the stuff in order and going off time travelling on her own. Speaking of parallels to the modern series, it feels a bit like Jenny. At the end of that particular story.
Literally, in terms of like, it's potentially some genetic warrior person.
Of course.
Instead of it being pulled from the Doctor's genetics, it's somehow the Brigadier. Which I still don't quite get how Cadiatu is who she is, because is she like a descendant of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, or is she like a cyber Ulpa warrior thing that's similar to Jenny?
Well, reading through Who afterwards, and if you have to read about a book afterwards to find out what happened, someone has failed somewhere. But it reckoned that the reason that version of that Lethbridge Stewart went into that operation was because his DNA had been used to help grow some of these children. And the reason she grabbed his finger was because she recognised her own DNA. Now, I didn't get that from the book at all, but it's a really nice idea. If the Lethbridge Stewarts are all warriors, it makes sense that they'll go there. He's the big warrior. He's had a lot of time with the Doctor. It makes sense. But it wasn't there. It was vaguely hinted at. You could infer it. Now, if I do read this again, and that's a huge if, I'll be looking for that reading those scenes, but it's...
Yeah. No, I mean, I thought it was, like, when she literally has a flashback scene to explain the story of her relationship with Alasdair, it's like suddenly something out of, like, Carry On Up the Khyber, where, like, he's, like, our beloved Brigadier is ogling this, like, 16-year-old walking... like in front of him and all of this, and I'm like, is this meant to be some sort of setup build for them to be together? Because again, I'm like, the idea of the sexual content within this book is fine, but for it to be in something like the Brigadier in maybe the 1950s, 60s, and Sierra Leone was like, right, no, this is a bit.
That's exactly how I remember the character in the Pertwee era.
Yeah. I forgot it was Sid James who played Brigadier Alasdair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart.
It was just... But Yeah, the fact that she was 16 was just uncomfortable. Even before you get to the cultural differences, the whole grown man ogling a 16-year-old girl is not a good look. And I can't imagine it played well back then. It definitely doesn't play well now.
No, I can imagine not.
It's fine in the 50s.
But this is the thing, it's like, do we need to have, like, era-accurate sexism and, like, leeriness to be grounded upon the vague ideas we have of, like, Lethbridge Stewart, because we just know him to be army man, old army chap that is there as part of Doctor Who, but we don't go into his family stuff. We don't go into him, you know, when he clocks out of unit, like going down like Oxford Street, going whoa, like we don't do that stuff, because it's not really the side of Doctor Who we want. It's what they are doing.
I also felt as if they felt they needed to justify why the Brigadier would have a black descendant. But given there's about a century between the Brigadier and Kadiatu, there's lots of things that could have happened.
Yeah. I wonder if he told Doris that he's got a whole strand of life somehow like thriving in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
Bizarre. And that's written as well by Ben Aaronovitch, who, you know, you'd think he would be up to date, keeping up with the Lethbridge Stewarts to know their family lineage, but yeah, I did find that a bit odd, and I still don't quite get the relation and how she was created, but yeah.
I'm glad you said that, though, because I didn't really follow that either.
They put such an emphasis on the importance of her heritage, and then kept saying, and then he adopted her. Well, that means that heritage isn't hers. That's, genetically speaking, at any rate, there was a germ of a good idea there that didn't feel fully developed and not fully captured by the editors. And it makes sense if you sent the chapters out of order, because it's entirely possible Darvel Evans went, I'm sure that's explained in something I've not read yet, or I've read and forgotten. Also, if he was only getting chapters, and he only got a few chapters before it got bound and published, was this essentially a first draft?
I think it might have been. In terms of at least having the chapters in order, yes.
Because that would actually explain an awful lot about it. It reads like a first draft. With no trimming, no finesse, no...
So, I'm sure I read somewhere in my prep for this that this at least had one revision, because this was originally not written with Benny in mind. And that Kadiatu was actually meant to be the sort of stand-in companion, and then there was a bit of Benny sort of shoved in right at the end, which explains a lot, obviously. But yeah, so at least some editing went on, which is even more disappointing in a way.
Yeah, because like it must have been, if Benny wasn't included in the first draft, you know, who would be filling in that possession character if that's... Well, actually, to be honest, that's the only motive that's driving the Doctor and Kadiatu is by having to go try and find Benny. So I don't know if it's that Zamina character perhaps that would be the stand-in, because he's quite chummy with her near the end and quite endearing towards her. So I don't know if that might have been the potential stand-in. But again, like you say, Alice said earlier, it could have also been Ace. And as trigger happy as Kadiatu is throughout this book, it's just been shooting the next version, whatever the latest version of Ace Kadiatu can see in front of her. But I don't know if, in terms of the Doctor's character then, because like I say, like he was quite endearing towards Zamina near the end, but how did you find the Doctor within this book compared to what we've had, and even how he's been written in the show?
There's a really interesting bit, isn't there, where he gets drunk in this book, celebrating the university's birthday, whatever it is. This seems to be one of those many bullet points that people rant about when talking about this book. I didn't mind it, I have to say. It's the sort of fun thing that wouldn't have happened on the TV. You know, you wouldn't have got the Doctor getting sloshed, and it's not offensive. It's fine. It's a bit of fun. I quite enjoyed that actually. Yes, perhaps it's out of character, but it didn't think it's not dramatically out of character. It's not like he's gunning down people or anything like that. So I thought that was quite fun. Yeah.
See, I'd have been okay with it if Benny hadn't been missing in the TARDIS out somewhere else. It would have,
That's true.
if it had been Benny's going for a wonder, the TARDIS has been parked, I'd have been fine with it, like you say, Jim. It would have made perfect sense, but it just... crisis! Let's get sloshed.
Yeah, I mean, like him getting sloshed is one thing, and you can literally imagine Sylvester McCoy playing that up and doing that really well in the sort of comedic style of being like stereotypical drunk Scottish man, which I'm sure he would lap up. But yeah, that there is that sense of the necessity of that within the book, and there was one particular sentence the Doctor says that kind of summarises the issues, at least for me, for the book, when he's trying to, near the end, kind of think about, why hasn't he saved the day already and all of this, and he says there's been too many distractions, he thought, too much retrospection and much too much also. And it felt like, yeah, even though that in itself is a kind of introspection, it is very true that all it has been there's been so many distractions, like let's just get pitched with Kadiatu, or let's do all of that sort of stuff. There isn't that sense of drive, and which I think other edits might have helped to try and give that sense of urgency and drive. The issue would be within the plot would be much, much shorter, because so much of the book is distraction, to just be like for the world building stuff and showing different parts of the universe in that way.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier about Benny, that this is her first go in the TARDIS. You would think that the Doctor feels terribly responsible for her, A, going missing, and then B, being possessed or whatever. And yeah, it seems to be the last thing on his mind a lot of the time. You do get the sense that he's not fussed, or that he'll get around to it at some point, but it's not top of his list,
Having said that, there was one passage that I really enjoyed for summing up the Doctor, which is, if you've indulged me, I've just called it up here. She remembered a series of boxes within boxes, infinity nesting within the finite, a control room that seemed almost a parody of technology, a figure standing at a console. It too was trans-dimensional, something monstrous crammed down into a parody of human flesh. I thought it was a brilliant description of the Doctor. And then, but didn't quite jibe with him getting sloshed.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of ties into what at least Ben Aaronovitch and that sort of ilk's idea of the Doctor, I think, is. It's like, especially in this universe of quite a cyberpunky, grimy, gritty world, that description is very apt and very suitable for the Doctor in a lot of ways. And so that's I think, because everything is so cynical in terms of how that world works, like viewing him as a monster that's trapped in human flesh and such, it's quite a visceral image, and it might be a cynical image of the Doctor, but it fits well for this world. And he it's not to say that he's always as cold as that, because he can be very cold and manipulative, and especially to Kadiatu, even like as unlikable as she is, he is in auto manipulation mode, like he always seems to be within the VNAs, where he's telling, like, they see a whole amount of bodies after some tragedy has happened, and the Doctor just instructs her to cry, like on the spot, just say cry, and earlier on slaps her in the face to try and compose her, instructs her to jump over holes she can't see. Like, he's very commanding and controlling of his would-be companion, and I think if Benny was in the picture, I think that's the issue, is that because Benny isn't in the picture, he can't project what he would be doing, and so what instead is he channels the energy of his seventh Doctor into who he thinks the companion is, because like I say, I think Aaronovitch is still just writing as if Kadiatu is the companion, and then at the end kind of be like, oh, you'll rue the day, Peter Double Evans, for not choosing this person. Yeah. But yeah, I think he's also like he can be quite gentle in moments as well, and almost kind of, I mean, introspective. Like he is aware of that, but it's a nice gentle introspection of himself, because he says at one point, like when he's thinking he might die or disappear, think only this of me, that there is a corner of a foreign field that is forever Gallifrey. It's just like, he's always finding somewhere that he can go home, essentially. And it's like, it's a nice idea of what the Doctor universally is about, which I quite liked.
Well, and on that note, actually, there's a note I made that we get the return of the house on Allen Road, actually. This isn't the first time it's appeared, but I think it's the second time. But it's quite interesting to have a place that the Doctor anchors himself to like that. But the only time we really had that in the classic series was the unit sort of base, and that was forced on him. So the fact that he's deliberately picked this kind of anchor point like that, somewhere he can keep popping back to, even if he isn't necessarily calling it home, is quite interesting, actually.
Mm. How did you find that device as well? Like, because especially this time round, since you've been reading from that perspective, I think it's in Warhead. No, not Warhead. Is it Warhead? Cat's Created Warhead? Yes, Cat's Created Warhead. I keep losing how many track of wars there are within Andrew Cartmell's mind. Yeah, like within that one, it's a nice establishment within there, but we're seeing it, 2 centuries later, and it's still got some of the kind of quaintness within it, and regardless of the adult themes of the book, or attempted adult themes, all whilst folk are having sex upstairs, he's making dinner and he just thinks it's children playing or laughing. And it was like, it helped kind of show the Doctor still feels all this adult stuff that you think's happening upstairs, to him it's just a bit childish, which I quite liked, because it then it directly says something to those folk who think that it is, we need to be Torchwoodifying Doctor Who in a lot of ways.
I also like the hints that other Doctors stayed there at various other points, so that it wasn't completely abandoned.
Yeah. And
speaking of other Doctors, did either of you catch the other Doctor reference in here? There was 2 incarnations of the Doctor kicking around.
Within the story?
No, I don't think I...
Within the story, the Flying Dutchman is the Merlin Doctor from Battlefield.
Ah,
is it?
Because if you read the novelisation of Battlefield, which I have, because I'm that guy, he talks about, you have a scene with Merlin in it, and he's described as having an Afghan coat, and whenever he's mentioned in the New Adventures, he's wearing the Afghan coat. So when the captain of the Flying Dutchman appears, he's wearing the Afghan coat, and he gives, was it Francine? Look, or was it Ming? I always got those 2 mixed up, Ming and Francine, but he gave somebody,
Francine,
look,
yeah.
Here's information that's important to the plot, go and do something with it, and then disappears. So part of the reason the house in Allen Road is dilapidated is because the Doctor's living online in this era. He's a digital pirate.
Interesting. I was trying to think where that strand was going to go, because I didn't quite, again, nice world building, knowing about Francine and her lewd empire that she builds to keep thriving upon, but I had no idea how the Flying Dutchman sailing the digital seas was going to go. I don't know if because how many books now have we had a digital cyberscape? We've had last book, Love and War had it. Cat's Cradle Warhead had it. Thank goodness.
It was the 90s. This was
Nightshade didn't, but other than that, it's been it's been a lot of cyberscape sort of stuff happening.
And also, we're also calling back to Silence in the Library with people existing digitally.
Yeah,
remember that's where River got saved. So it's And if you listen to Stephen Moffat, Dr. Moon in that is another version of the Doctor. He's just living digitally.
Oh.
This is the book that keeps on giving. It's deeper than you think it is.
Well, one thing I know they won't be adapting, perhaps, is Francine's establishment, where she has some, like a sex club ran from underwater. You didn't see that in the Underwater Menace. Well, maybe that's in episode 4. Maybe that's where, maybe that's where Zaroff is drowning. He's being pulled under by the Joy Boys. Or whatever they were called. Yeah.
I did read that this was proposed as an actual episode of Doctor Who when it was still in the air, and I kind of want to see. I want to imagine Andrew Cartmell's face reading this, going, "They're where? They're doing what?" I would love to be in. I would love to have been there for that pitch meeting. It's like,
how many Fs?
Who are we calling a daddy? Exactly.
You did what when she fell on the floor?
Forgot about that bit.
Oh no.
Oh, yeah. I'd be very interested. I think he only had like a page script, a page idea to Cartmell for it. But yeah, I dare say a lot of that would be not fleshed out, as it were.
Sorry. Oh,
but yeah, one other thing actually I think won't be fleshed out would have been if we did have, say, a Benny like possession, and her possession essentially, you know, I'm trying to think what it was really for, as because it's not to, it's essentially, I think, to try and cause the two lines to kind of reactivate, to try and build another wormhole to bring more monsters through. I don't know.
So, isn't there an implication at the end that the monster, Fred, whatever you want to call it, sort of worked out what the Doctor was, the potential of the Doctor, and possessed Benny to lure him into its realm, and that's sort of what the whole actual plot of... Or did I just massively misread that? The whole end bit escaped me, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
It was too trippy, I don't know.
Yeah.
it was a sudden charge of the leopard with the two cats behind it. It's like, have I wandered back into the Cat's Cradle trilogy?
Yeah. I was like, is this like a portal in Nightmare of Eden, but just someone has crashed into this subconscious, and like I genuinely had no idea what really was happening.
The green cat is still bothering me, because the silver cat is blatantly the Doctor said he felt something was left behind. That was the silver cat again. The leopard, I think, was Kadiatu. I think that was the implication there. But the green cat, I've got no clue. What was the green cat?
The green cat.
And for my sins, I pictured that as Cringer from He-Man, just because it's the only green cat I could think of. There's possibly some really, really clever subtext going on there that I've just completely and utterly missed. But
because I was trying to think of it to see, was this some form of mirror thing, because it was in sync with the silver cat, and I was like, were the things that were in sync with, you know, the Cat's Cradle story? Not really.
Well, part of me wondered if it was maybe a representation of the Pythia, but that doesn't really work.
It wasn't the transit system's personification, was it? I don't know. I'm struggling to remember.
I don't think so, because that was that TV host who was the hologram. I can't remember his name. What was it?
Zach.
About that, even.
Zach.
No, not Zach. That was Blondie's name.
Yak Harris. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that was the personification of the transport system. But yeah,
you're right.
I don't know what the green cat would be.
Okay.
The Brigadier, because he wears a green jumper.
That makes as much sense as anything.
Yeah.
That's all we've got.
It's just a spare cat.
If you have an idea, spare cat. Yeah. If anyone has an idea at home like, at all, if anyone at home does have an idea about what the green cat represents, or what it represents to you, please do at us online, because, yeah, I genuinely don't know. I'm going to stick with that Brigadier theory.
The green cat was the friends we made along the way.
The green cat was the other, because it's green with envy that it can't come from the subconscious to the conscious and become the Doctor again.
See? Foreshadowing.
Very good. Yeah.
But no, yeah, so the point I was going before that was with Benny, and all of the possession work that she does to try and get to that point to assumedly lure the Doctor into a trap. It's one thing to have the your companion possessed, but it's another for them to do things that you would never want to see a companion do, including give a bomb to a child to become a suicide bomber.
Yeah, that was
Like,
You can see why she's still getting original stories made where she's the lead character to this day, can't you? This book really sets her up as the enduring,
oh yeah,
beloved companion, yeah?
she was the bomb for all of the fans. It's weird stuff like that, yeah, I don't have an issue with it being adult and cynical and gritty, because that's what this world demands. It's a very run down class separation, race segregation issues. Like, there's lots happening within it, and so everyone being unlikable and like really cynical stuff happening is one thing, but your Doctor Who characters can be stretched to a point, and if you're having a companion possessed or otherwise, like, do something like that, it's like it's stretching it a bit too much, I think, to have had someone you recognise and want to be, having a good first impression of as a new companion. It doesn't give that, unfortunately.
No. I wonder if this was a few books into Benny's arc, whether this would have gone down a bit better, at least on that plot front. But
I think it would have. I think it would have just had more breathing space to have known Benny and to have a wee bit of an arc from her being like hot on the Doctor's heels, saying like, no, we're partners, we're you're not going to treat me as a subordinate on the TARDIS, as we saw in the last book, to suddenly being, oh, I'm just like a pet to this person. It could have been a bit more of an arc to that, but yeah.
If Tegan got possessed by the Mara in her second story, in Castrovalva, for example, that wouldn't have gone down so well, I don't think.
No. No.
I mean, if it had been 4 or 5 books down the line, she sends her held out as a suicide bomber, it's like, oh, something's happened to Benny, but because it's the second book, it's like, who the hell is he picked up?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like it ties into the issues of not knowing what's happening. Like, you're coming like media and res, like suddenly in the middle of a scene, and like that's when you're finding out Benny's possessed and doing all this mad and yeah, like that doesn't help when you've just brought this person in, because you genuinely think it might well be her tactics and her way of life, because we're not told otherwise, and yeah, we don't have a frame to pull upon for this kind of character.
I was embarrassingly late to the, oh, she's possessed. It took me longer than it should have to work that one out.
I thought she was just having some fun. It felt like a zany thing Benny would do, of like, oh yeah, let's just like liberate some prostitutes and like fight the boy gangs, and all of that. I was like, yeah, sure, this is fun, until the child suicide bomber came along.
She always takes it too far.
That was your tipping point. That was your line in the sand, was
Yeah,
it?
that was the point. I was like, hang on a minute, something's up.
Oh.
Now, I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on anything else within the story itself, and those particular characters like the Floozies or Kadiatu and Zamina and all that.
I think the only kind of note I really made was how little I cared about them, and it sounds horrible, but It's one thing having this cynical world, this grim world, and I don't mind that, as I say, but none of these characters are interesting enough, let alone likeable enough, for me to mind what happens to them. You get invested in Case of Androzani, for example. You know, you don't like any of these characters, but you find their backstories interesting, you find their interactions interesting, you've got witty dialogue, and I just don't think you have that here, unfortunately. Every time a character gets splattered or whatever, all right, it's just one less name to remember, you know.
I had an awful moment where reading about the Scooby Gang. It was like, what? Lambada's a woman? When did that happen? Presumably she was a woman the whole way through it, but I just completely missed that particular character trait. She was that nondescript and not there. It was no.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the issue I had as well. Was like in Chibnall fashion, his inspiration looking at the Cyber Scooby Gang. There were too many people with not doing enough. Like, yeah, there was old Sam. There was Ming the Merciless. There was Lambada, Blondie, Credit Card, and someone else.
Don't forget Dogface.
Mad Dog. Dogface. Ugh.
And on that note,
and that's the thing. There's so many of them.
So, how comfortable were we with an Asian character being called Ming the Merciless?
Ugh.
I wasn't very.
Yeah.
That was. Yeah. Well, that was the thing. There were so many references rooted in what they thought was an acceptable way to paint vaguely what they were like. Like, yeah, Ming the Merciless. There were some gangs mentioned. The only one that I can remember now was the Le Pen Freikorps. Which I think was a kind of cutting edge reference, because I think at least Jean-Marie Le Pen wasn't like big until like later on, so it was a cutting edge thing to have a Le Pen reference that early on. But yeah, there was kind of very broad strokes, and sometimes ones that were just like questionable to have stuck around for, like that.
Yeah, it was a different time. Let's just stick that caveat down and move away from it.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, my issue for them was just there were so many of them. There were so many. Initially, the drama about the stop and everything, I was struggling to kind of follow who these people were and what they were doing. Not even to be at a state of unlikability, to just know who they were and what they were doing. So I never actually got to a state of not liking a lot of them. It was I just never got to know them really, which was my issue. For folk kind of on the periphery, like old Sam or Dogface or
it was like when
Lambada.
When Ming put Dogface into status so he would survive the whole thing, it was like, yes, one less person I have to follow. Excellent, do that. More of that, please.
Yes, honestly, like, yeah, because they were also like the only thing they all just shared the same sort of trait, which was to be hyper aggressive and angry and like a Suicide Squad sort of thing, and quite literally actually.
Blondie was perpetually horny.
Yeah,
he had that going for him.
Yeah,
that gave him a bit of difference from everybody else.
And he had blonde chest hair, which, I mean, I don't know any blonde people, and I've not checked any blonde people's bodies, but is that a thing? Because it was like blonde to the point of see-through, and I was like, yeah. If any blonde listeners are listening, just for my own clarity, I don't know if that's a thing. That is so translucent, but yeah, curious.
Yeah.
At least that was a thing that we could point to of like, here's Blondie, he's blonde, he's horny. Everyone else was just, everyone's like a drug-addled, angry person ready to shoot everything. And I mean, shoot they did, and die they did for some of them, in very graphic, very gory ways. But yeah,
having said that, I did like old Sam just because. Just as soon as the shit hit the fan, he pulled all his military stuff out of storage and went full metal jacket. That part I enjoyed, but he was the only one of the crew I cared about in any way, shape, or form. Just because he was waiting for things to go wrong, and they did. You just knew he was played by Michael Ironside.
There's a part of me that wonders if there were so many side characters just to have plenty of characters to kill. You know, but they could have just been nameless
well, that's the
extras,
issue.
really.
Yeah, I mean, when they do that, the main thrust of doing that is in the first chapter, to try and build up to say, oh, they're doing this massive new connection, the President of Earth's here, there's this scientist, and all of this, and, you know, they're all kind of getting the buzz about that, and then they kill everyone within the station, like, in the first chapter. And you think that would be reducing the character count quite a bit to make it a bit easier to focus upon, and it just really doesn't. At that point, because we still have so many other stations to jump to see who's where, and yeah, that's my main issue with this book, is jumping, the amount of jumping we take place to so many different locations, which I understand. We want to show that this is a truly interstellar sort of transport system, and we get to see so many different pockets of life, and there's some good station names. I mean, Buchanan Street's there. There's a Buchanan Street station.
Yeah.
So we've got our own local one put on, but for some reason it's on Pluto instead of the city centre like Glasgow. But yeah, it felt like it was just to try and prove that this is an expansive place, rather than, you know, things happening in these mad frontiers and having a story weaved just from one particular point of it, because it's all well and good to have like a massive cataclysmic thing, but stories like this that have a massive cataclysmic thing happen, that focus just on a certain amount of people in a certain space and how they resolve that, is sometimes the better way to maybe handle a story like this, I think. So do we have any last thoughts on on Transit?
It seems like it's a book designed to shock people and break boundaries, and in that regard it's a success. I don't think anyone can sort of say it didn't achieve those aims. I don't think I'm going to reread it anytime soon, let's put it that way, but I kind of appreciate what it was trying to do, I think. And actually, in terms of that kind of whole future arc that they were setting up here in the New Adventures, it does expand the universe somewhat, right? We do get Kiliata, we do get references to the Ice Warrior War. It's furthering the world, the universe, and yeah, I didn't mind it as much this time around. I think that's probably where I can leave that thought.
That's a fair enough thought indeed. Alasdair, how about yourself?
I'm not going to deviate too far from that. That's pretty much where I am. I didn't hate it as much as I thought I was going to, and parts of it I downright enjoyed, but I will not be reading that again any time soon. It's done. It's off my list. What one's next?
Well, thankfully we have a book that's not called Transit next, at least.
Transit 2.
We've got the Highest Science next. Oh God. Transit to
Electric Boogaloo.
next destination. Transit to no, thankfully, yes. Next book we'll be doing is The Highest Science. However, before that, we do have some comments from our listeners. Quite a lot of comments, I have to say, that we did get on this one. I want to say it's more than most of the ones we've done so far, actually, which again shows how this is still in the hearts and minds of Doctor Who fans across the nation. I don't know if maybe Jim, if you want to kick us off.
Yes, so you sent me some earlier. We've got Gareth, who's at Gar30 on X. Not perfect, but underrated. It has the enjoyable, tangible unpleasantness of the first Red Dwarf novel, and the build-up to the train's last is fantastic. Does it include a rude line about a prostitute's day job? Well, yeah. What did folk think that she did for a living? I think it sidelines Bernice in a fairly nervous way, which is unfortunate, as Aaronovitch is the sort of writer who could really bring her out. And it ends in a typical for the NA's mind battle, all very I'd recommend folk read it.
I forgot we didn't even mention the spunk line. we got through an hour, we got through an hour of the episode and didn't talk about it. I think that's a record for anyone talking about transit and not bringing up the semen in the...
I thought we were just carefully dancing around it. But yeah, okay.
No, I just forgot. Yeah, but yeah, I'm that line I am fine with because of that very reason. It's what people would face in that role, and yeah, having prostitutes as characters, we might as well just hear the reality of their life, and I'm fine with that character building part of it.
Cool.
I don't know if anyone else felt strongly about,
Nah, it does. It's not the worst thing in this book.
No. Also on Twitter, we had Joe Ford at Doctor who was on previously, and he also says cola nuts, death, transport accidents, sex in Allen Road, plus 10 points for ambitious science fiction scene setting, minus 5 million points for being a miserable, impenetrable, cyberpunk-obsessed read. Aaronovitch writes one of the best NAs and one of the worst. You work it out.
From John Porter as well, who's at JS Porter 1966. Started reading it, couldn't get into it, and it's still on the shelf 30 years later. Well, hopefully we've encouraged you to give it a go. It's not that bad.
Yeah. Dave Kitchen from the Doctor Who show has said, I would have been 12 when I read this. What is it with people reading this age 12? Firstly, it was that girl in Plymouth, and now it's Dave Kitchen.
There's every possibility I was 12 when I tried to read this the first time around as well. I don't remember. But...
It's the seminal age for sticking in the minds of 12-year-olds is the transit.
Seminal.
So he said, I would have been 12 when I read this and got nothing out of it. A very hard read. Looking back now, I can appreciate the concepts and what Aaronovitch was going for, but the memories aren't great. Curious to hear your views and see if it merits a reread. So, well, you never know. You never know, Dave. After this, you might still have it on your shelf.
Yeah. Go for a fair bit of money now, I think. So.
Oh, yeah. And Alice, do you want to read out who we've got on Facebook?
Yep, surely. First up, we have Stuart Smith. I remember it being painful to read. Quite probably the worst Doctor Who novel I've ever read. Sorry. I like the fact that he's apologising. It's like, no, you're fine. You're allowed. We had Greg Bartlam. Hope I pronounced that right. It's a long time since I read Transit, but I really hated it at the time. It felt like it belonged to a different genre. I may get it a bit more now I'm older, but I have no great urge to go back to it. Okay, fair. Jay Millhouse. Read it upon release in January 93, but could not make head or tails of it. I was 19, so he was a wee bit older, and not well read enough to understand the point. I read it again in early 2011, now pushing 40, and it was gloriously brilliant. What other book in the line is going to tell Edith Piaf jokes? A meditation on war, ambition, politics, teen culture, and the Doctor's role in history. Okay, so Jay quite enjoyed it. Richard Lamb with It's good but a little dense. Yeah, that's a fair comment. And finally we have Marie Vaughan with I struggled with it in my youth, just about finished it last week, still not a favourite. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a
mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag, but it's surprisingly mixed because it's thankfully not as uniform. And in fact, I think we had a comment on Instagram as well. Maybe I think Jim, you had.
Yes, so we've got Guernsey Nick 69 on Instagram, I think. rusty memory is that my contrarian self of the 90s preferred this to Neuromancer, but it took me a while to get through. I'll give it a reread and try and get back to you before you record the podcast. Guessing he didn't.
He did not. Well, I'll double check just to make sure, Guernsey Nick. I don't think you did. And
well, let us know, Guernsey Nick.
and no one is begrudging you that, because who would? No, you did not. He did. He just left a comment.
I'm not rereading that.
This is future Anthony, who's in the midst of editing, and whilst doing so, got a message on Instagram from Guernsey Nick. Here's his review. Well, that was more impressive than I remembered. Somehow recognisably Who and Cyberpunk at the same time. Great world building and side stories. The secret AI is a great aside. Kadiatu is such an interesting character. You wish she turned up more frequently. The A-plot is a bit ordinary, but when the rest of this is this good, who cares? Oh yes, Benny gets sidelined, but that was a late editorial change, I believe. Thank you very much, Guernsey Nick, for getting in touch just in time before I posted this up on the internet. Over on, finally on Twitter, we also had Oscar Groucho, who said, perhaps one of the most important of the range. What was contemporaneously viewed as format breaking is vital in stretching the elasticity of the commissioning brief. Well, I think it's, stretching the deadline of the commissioning brief was the main thing that I was doing, to be honest. But yes, aspects are totally unnecessary, but the iconography is memorable and setting distinct, worth a re-evaluation. And finally, Alex Wilcock sent Ben Aaronovitch and Bernie Summerfield had each been brilliant for one previous novel, and I was eager for more of both. Transit disappointed me first time around because there was too little Benny, but Ben was too much. Rereading a few years ago when my Doctor Who horizons had broadened and Bernice had flourished, so I was much less put off. On the downside, many characters are unengaging and it's one of the thinner plots despite the intriguing idea of a transit system so complex it develops sentience. Yet the world building is compelling, the prose is often fantastic, and there's a delightful moment when the Doctor sees Battlefield on TV as an opera. I didn't clock that, actually. Was that when he's building up the kind of there's the kind of musical scene, as it were, where he's like timing things, or when he's when did that happen? I can't remember.
No, I missed that.
That was quite early on. It was just
well, at least someone picked it up.
It's when him and Kadiatu were recovering from their drinking session. He found it randomly on the telly.
Oh, okay. Oh.
It's not immediately obvious
we are.
though. I had read it a couple of times to go, am I reading this right? And I'm still not convinced I was. But yeah, it was there.
While the prelude gives the Brigadier free will, told after the destroyer he was meant to die in bed, he escapes that death too. And my husband loves transit way more than I do, and I trust his judgment. Well, don't know if I do. Moving in with him also led to my own personal reason for coming to love transit, which is that since 2 years after it was published, I've lived 20 minutes walk away from Ming's mansion in the novel A Glamorous Period residence. So he lives. He's included some photos of what I believe is meant to be where Ming in this book resides from when it's set in London. So that's very handy. Thank you very much, Alex.
Cool.
And very finally on Blue Sky, we had 2 comments as well. We had Dale Smith, who said, this is a brilliant book, and I will fight any of you who suggest it's puerile or teenage. Embracing the possibilities of Doctor Who novels and making a great stab at broadening Who's scope to embrace Afrofuturism and lovely incidental details here and there like Samurai X Warriors, which to be honest, I disagree with those positives on those books. Yeah. And finally, we have writer of Fear Itself, the only 8th Doctor Past Doctor adventure, Nick Wallace, who says, "It's an absolute gift of a book, so full of effortless world building, creating an environment it be a joy to play in." And I did. I have to say, I've not read Nick's work.
Do you know, I did read Fear Itself when it came out, and I hadn't read Transit at that point, so I'll need to go back and reread that thing.
Well, yeah, it's again, Transit.
It is Transit 2.
It's Transit 2.
Finally!
It inspires all of the generations of people across all fandom. Every Doctor has something to pull. Like, from the 8th Doctor gets something in Fear Itself. They use the TARDIS energy for the 9th Doctor. River Song encounters a Cadiatu clone. Everyone across from this moment onwards is inspired by Transit.
This train terminates here.
Anyway, so that's all our comments. We got a lovely amount of comments there, and thankfully it was more mixed than it was in 1992. So thank you all for writing in on that. And yes,
give it another 30 years, they might be positive.
Well, yeah, I was surprised by how we were not as highly critical as I think the uniformity of fan wisdom perceives this book to be. Like, there are nuggets within this to enjoy, but perhaps not revisit too often. But yes, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. Thank you to Jim for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me back on.
And where can folk find you if they do so wish to online?
I'm at Trenowden on Blue Sky. I think I'm still on X in theory. I don't really post there. So.
Grand. And Alasdair, thank you as always. Good to see you.
Not always a pleasure. Apologies for any technical hiccups. We'll blame Florence.
No worries at all. Hopefully it'll all work out in the edit. Unlike Transit. Oh! And on that note, we're cutting it there. Thanks for listening to another episode of Too Broad and Too Deep. You can get in touch with us on social media at Too Broad Too Deep Pod, that's with the number 2, on Blue Sky, Twitter and Instagram. You can also contact our Facebook page, Doctor Who Too Broad and Too Deep Podcast, and that's with the word 2. Or you can email us at toobroadtoodeeppod@gmail.com, and that's also with the word TOO. Hope to hear from you soon.